Hello and welcome to the Wild Cities podcast. I'm Chris Fitch. I've got another special bonus episode for you today. This is a recording from Stanfords bookstore in Bristol at an event that took place a couple of weeks ago when we held this event hosted by Emma Brisdion of the For What It's Earth podcast, who did a great Q&A with me, lots of very thoughtful and probing questions. And we discussed the ins and outs of Wild Cities, the process of writing a book, the content, where I could have done better perhaps. And that recording went out on the For What It's Earth podcast. And Emma and her co-host Sophie have kindly agreed to let me post it again here. If you don't know For What It's Earth, I would definitely recommend subscribing. It's an excellent, very professional, very thoughtful podcast that's also entertaining to listen to, which is not an easy thing to pull off. And while your finger is hovering around the subscribe button, why not subscribe to the Wild Cities podcast as well? I've got another interview or two lined up, and then I've got some ideas about what I'm going to do with this podcast now that the book is already launched, and thinking about other things I can do with it. So stay subscribed, and anything that I do end up creating and releasing will drop straight into your feed. So thank you, Emma, very much for this wonderful event. Thank you to the audience who came along. And here is the conversation between myself and Emma Brisdion at Stanfords, Bristol, talking about Wild Cities.
Thanks, Mel, for introducing us. Thank you, all of you, for coming. What an absolute treat it is. I used to live in Bristol. I'll take any excuse to come back, particularly to Stanfords. So, Chris, thank you for letting me chew your ear off.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
So, Wild Cities, that's what we're here to talk about today. Quick show of hands first. Who's read the book? Oh, okay. Bonus points to your dad. Halfway through. Nice. And then I was curious, how many of you live in a city? Okay, most of the room.
Relevance. Yeah.
Would anyone say they're a countryside folk? A couple? Yeah, good. Yeah, nice. Nice. And how many people think their city or their countryside should be wilder? Good show of hands. Very nice. Okay, well, we'll start with Wild Cities. You've literally just published it.
Yeah.
How's that week gone?
It's been good. It's fun. It's a little overwhelming. You're very the center of attention, which is not normally my scene, but it's positive, and lots of people have wanted to talk about it. There's kind of an immediate reaction people get from the cover and the concept, that they have questions of like, what did you do and why? And before they've even engaged with what the book is and the arguments I'm making, which is a good sign. It's exciting. Like, after some years of thinking so much about a specific topic, the danger is that you lose interest in it yourself, and that hasn't happened, thankfully, but especially to then get that reaction from people who then want to engage with the subject matter. So brilliant, this is why I did it. You want to have that conversation.
It's a very striking cover. Was that one of the cities that you visited?
Yes.
This is one of your photos?
This is one of my photos. This is from Singapore, which I can briefly tell the story because...
Nah, we're not interested in that.
Because the focus for the Singapore chapter, which Singapore gets quoted so much when you talk about ecology in cities, but my focus was on green infrastructure and specifically green walls, green rooftops, embedding greenery into the built environment, on the buildings. And there's a nationwide or citywide program, city-state. There's a scheme where they will fund up to kind of 50% of the cost of putting this on your building, because they understand
That's quite a lot, isn't
incentives.
it? Yeah.
They're very motivated to make things be the way they want them to be. And then after that, there's a map that gets put out. I think they update it every year to say, like, these are the buildings where this has happened, which made it very easy for me to then wander around and see them. In this case, I managed to get completely lost. I did not want to be in this particular location. Oh, no. I was looking for something completely different, but I ended up here, and it's a credit to how much of this kind of stuff there is in Singapore, that even being in the wrong place, I still found what actually was, you can't really see on this particular photo, but it's a multi-story car park, and on top of that is a forest, and then surrounding that are all these tall residential towers. I
Wow.
wandered around, took some photos, thought, can I go up some of those towers? And I managed to go up some of the stairwells and take some shots out over this forest. I'm a little bit making up the numbers, but I'm going to say something like 8, 9, 10 stories up.
My goodness. You don't get that from the picture
Yeah.
at all. That brings me on to something I was going to ask you about later, but we'll travel to Singapore first. That's great. One of the things you were talking about in the book was, I think we're all familiar with the concept of sticking a garden on a rooftop. But in Singapore, they go so much further than that.
Yeah.
And the way that they were designing like the landscape in the sky so that you had different ecological niches, I wondered if you might share a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's thinking beyond just the aesthetics of what would look nice, because that's perfectly valuable. I'm not saying like, don't make your gardens look nice or your rooftop gardens look nice. But because part of their motivation is really about encouraging and supporting the native ecology, bugs and birds, and of course, endangered plant life, that they're looking at a rooftop and saying, not just how do we make this look attractive for people and it's a nice relaxing space away from the noise and the dirty air at street level and this kind of thing, but also how do we design this for biodiversity? And just a basic thing, which is one of the examples that I went to, which is to acknowledge that a forest normally isn't flat, like a rooftop is normally flat. And so instead you get buildings that have kind of levels on them, and you have some kind of plants and forests and trees on the lower levels and on upper levels. And so you get the canopy of the lower bit mixing with the soil level on the higher bit, which means you get this kind of constant exchange and movement of nature broadly, which is a much better sort of replication of what you would find in the real world, in the natural environment, than a flat, boxy surface where you've plonked things on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, you described it so well to the point of saying you end up with rolling hills by design, but like meters and meters up on balconies and not even on rooftops as well. Like sometimes just halfway in the middle of a skyscraper, they've designed it with the idea of saying, well, we'll stick a forest in here or we'll stick this ecological niche in there and that will complement what's happening in this neighbourhood.
Yes, because they have this topological thinking of what does this structure look like to a non-human creature? Because we can look at something and say that's a house, that's an office block, a skyscraper, but what does it look like to a bee or a bird or whatever it might be? And for example, your green wall is a bit like a cliff. And then you can look at a real life cliff and say, well, what can live on a cliff? And so, on some of the structures, it's like someone's punched a hole in the thing, because you get these, like a simulation of a cave or like tunnels that you would get in nature, and recreating them in these structures so that you can put these little gardens and everything in there, and it's kind of recreating that environment of what would be found in the natural world.
I mean, I've only been to Singapore for like a day in passing, and I did what everybody else did. I went to the gardens by the bay, and I was still amazed. I thought that Singapore was a really beautiful, cool, innovative place to be in, but I didn't even consider just not doing that touristy thing and wandering around and seeing what other amazing green infrastructure they designed the city with.
There's levels.
Literally.
You can see even just going down like the motorways that you've got green corridors all the way along it. So even dropping in for a few hours. Everyone praises Singapore for this kind of thing, and they've taken it very seriously. So there's a reason it gets talked about so much. But it's the extent to which it's really embedded, and it's not just symbolic, but it's kind of, we're taking this seriously and it's universally available. That's the point. It's not about being exclusively for the people who can afford to live on the penthouse level of these buildings.
Yeah, but us middle tierers get a shot at it as well.
You can have a look around. Yeah, this is nice.
Well, so every chapter in the book, you go and visit a different city all around the world. So obviously harking back to your sort of travel writing experience. And each chapter focuses on the different challenges or different type of challenge that city is trying to overcome in myriad different ways. And I thought, sticking with forests, maybe you could introduce the room in the same way that you introduced the book, in the middle of Tokyo. take us to the forests and tell us a bit about how those forests that you were visiting were actually very carefully designed in a way to mimic like old growth forest very quickly.
So, yes, the first chapter, for those who haven't got that far yet,
Lots of nods.
the first chapter, it's Tokyo-based, or it's sort of Japan-based. It applies to the whole country, to be true. But it's looking at the urban forest from a few different perspectives. I think the two main stories that I'm telling there, it's either about a very big or a very small urban forest. The very big one is the one which, show of hands, anyone been to Tokyo? Couple, yeah, 3, 4, 5. The Meiji Forest, which is quite a big popular tourist attraction, but it's just a classic example of it just looks like, oh, there was a forest here and maybe it was preserved or something. And the reality is that if you were there, let's say 110 years ago, there was no forest. It was barren, it was industrial, and it was created because the purpose, the specific purpose was because the emperor at the time passed away and his wife as well, and they wanted to commemorate them with a big shrine. And the idea is that the shrines have nature around them. And so they literally created a forest in order to put this shrine there within what was now the new capital of Japan, and got trees in from all around the country to, within just a couple of years, be able to say, look, we've created a forest here. And yeah, well done. And it's not the only place in the world where that's happened, but the challenge is how many cities can pull off something like that. Like, even putting the money and everything to one side, space is going to obviously such a huge issue, which is what takes you to the second Tokyo story.
He's good. It's good.
Which is the Miyawaki forests. Familiarity with Miyawaki forests, show of hands?
That's a resounding no.
No?
Oh, well.
One?
They were talking about having it in Dartmoor the other day.
Oh, really?
So,
Well, we're going to pick up on that later.
the basic premise is understanding what would grow in a particular area if there were no people and infrastructure and general interference. And it might take a couple of hundred years to get there, but was trying to understand what type of forest would you have in a certain place and what would the species be, and saying, let's just jump straight to that instead of waiting for the process of succession of one species followed by another species followed by another species. Because if you have that knowledge, and this is why it's so unique to every different part of the world, because there's specific species you will find in the forest in Japan, but it's the same here, and all different parts of the world that we've got different biomes and different species that are native and that are going to appear. And it's called a Miyawaki forest because it's named after Miyawaki Akira, who was an ecologist from Japan who passed away only a few years ago. But in his life, he had this incredible impact in terms of what he learned about this method. I mean, he created this method of fast tracking the forest succession and did lots of experimentation, including in Tokyo, in Yokohama, such as the university there in the 70s, and just first experimenting with this idea of, well, what if we know what trees we want to have here? And so what we do is you get just a sapling, so maybe it's a year or so old, and put lots of them very dense in a certain area so they compete with each other and grow really fast. And once they grow, you instantly have that forest that you're aiming for. And I don't think that his initial approach was, oh, this is going to be something that can happen in a city necessarily. Like it can be done on Dartmoor or wherever. But I think it just became apparent with experimentation, it doesn't need to be done in a large area. And the smallest one I saw, as I wrote about, it's like a 1 meter forest.
This blew my mind.
And it's just to make this point that we can find there are spaces in the city, or maybe you can take something out. I mean, that 1 meter forest, there was a built thing there, and it was done on the edge of a school. The headmaster just took it out and said, I want to put this forest here instead. And so if you don't have the space for a giant emperor worshipping shrine forests, then it's possible to do these little ones as well, which are
Tiny shrine
probably
forest.
a lot more relevant. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think I was wondering if you thought maybe that's a bit of a metaphor for like what we could all do as well as individuals, because you talk to experts who are doing big citywide projects, but I think a lot of us will look at the climate biodiversity crisis and think, cripes, what can I do as well? And for me, the fact that you started this book was something that started on a big scale and then immediately went down to you can grow a forest in a metre squared, and that's about the size of my garden.
Yeah.
Was quite inspiring. I was quite excited by that concept.
I hope that is something that people would take away with it. I mean, it's not too much of a how-to guide on wilding cities, but it's just such a good example of the conclusion I came to with the book is that you, certainly looking at the anecdotes I'm telling and these particular stories, there are very few that don't have both the sort of top-down guidance, whether it's like a mayor or a national government, council support, but then also having that kind of bottom-up kind of groundswell of enthusiasm and passion and people who are willing to volunteer and make it happen. It's when those combine.
Yeah.
And this is a good example of that, where I don't think probably no one in this room is in a position to go out and create a gigantic forest in the city.
If you are, let me know.
You are, well done to you. But yes, a small Miyawaki forest, a metre or two, or whatever you might have, that's a lot more realistic. And the speed is another interesting point to kind of emphasize, because people always quoted to me, I'm not entirely sure that the data backs this up, but people always say, a metre a year that they grow up, which a few years later, and you're looking at a pretty decent sized set of trees.
Yeah, not bad. Yeah. So maybe my postage stamp garden isn't quite right for a full sort of 3 metre high forest.
We try.
Yeah. I think what's exciting is that even those small elements of nature can create really valuable reserves and stepping stones for wildlife in our cities, and inviting them back in. It's not, like you say, all about the massive spaces and the big city parks and things.
Yeah, and actually, one of the points I wanted to explore and then to kind of talk about, and I'm still kind of getting my head around this to some extent, is, so for example, when I was doing the research on what cities should be in this book, you Google greenest cities, leafiest cities, largest urban forests kind of thing, and just see what kind of stories are coming up and what research has been done. And you get some examples where something will have a really large percentage, or say, this is a very green forest, 50% forested. You think, that's quite impressive.
Yeah.
But it turns out that it's all over there. It's like one side, there's a very big forest, and on the other side, it's the urban built up.
Yes.
And you go, well, it almost doesn't really count because it's not around where people are actually living. I mean, what I've written about doesn't necessarily have to apply to cities. It's basically just, where do people live? Most people live in urban environments. So it's just about principles that apply to that. And so I wanted to emphasize this point of not just Miyawaki forests, but corridors and other things, and meadows, and ways where you can have natural elements injected into the urban area, and not simply be, there's a great big forest in the city, but you have to travel an hour to get there.
Yeah.
It might as well not be there.
Yeah. It's not effectively, is it? Exactly what we're saying. So before you Googled 12 greenest, wildest cities and planned your trips, how did you come up with the idea for the book? Was it that you were traveling somewhere and you thought, gosh, this place is really wild? Or were you traveling to really barren places and thinking, it could really do with a bit more nature? What kind of spurned this for you?
I had something maybe a decade ago where I was starting to, I was really interested in this as a topic. Like, I think because, and I kind of describe a bit in the prologue, talking about being in London in an area where it was really lacking in greenery.
Yeah.
And that's what prompted my first thoughts of, there's something in this, because I know it's not just about me. I know that this thing about how more than half of the world, around 55% of the global population now, I think I've seen 85% for the UK, right, of people who live in an urban area. And if anyone feels the way I did, then it's going to be relevant. It's relevant to all of us. But then I sat on this idea for years, just doing my work until, because it was just very hard to understand like some kind of format or structure or some way to actually
Yeah.
explore something which other people have written about before.
Yeah.
What do I have that's different to say about this? And it was this specific, yes, it was like you said, I was reading about Wellington in New Zealand, specifically the fact that they have been, as I write about in the book, encouraging with various programs the return of native birds. It's kind of based mainly around the creation of habitat through this big protected area, Zealandia, which started like in the mid to late 90s, and since then it's changed the ecology of the city. I mean, it's what I was saying before, where it's just one particular area over there. But the point is that provides a safe haven where all these species, which have been annihilated by all the invasive mammals that were taken over to New Zealand, which was historically didn't have any predators. Now that all these species, they have a safe haven, they're able to go out around the city, and tui and kaka and all these birds that would never have been seen in an urban environment, now they're everywhere. And so there was part of me going, oh yeah, that was the thing I wanted to write about, urban nature. Maybe Wellington's the one for me to focus on. But instead I had this idea of, well, I don't think there is any one city in the world that's doing so well in this area that I should just write about that and say, oh, isn't this place brilliant? But to say, okay, if we're just looking at, if I was to do, let's say, a chapter on birds, hypothetically, maybe Wellington would be a good candidate. And it was that kind of, okay, one chapter, one theme, one city idea that then I found myself going, okay, yeah, and then I can think of another place for this thing, and I would need to mention this theme. Oh well, I've already been to this place.
That's what's going on. So have you been to all of these cities before?
Some of them were brand new when I first arrived.
Which ones?
Never been to Tallinn before. Never been to Medellin before. Maybe that's it, actually.
Did any of them surprise you? Like when you arrived, you had the chapter in your mind, maybe.
Yeah.
And did any of the chapters have to take a different turn, or something that stands out?
I had that with places that didn't make the book that I travelled.
Oh, go on. Where didn't make the book?
But then
Tell us what's in the bin.
Entirely changed it. No, the sad one that's in the bin was Berlin. I spent a week there. Yeah, this is the secret, 13th chapter. Focus on that was going to be about sound.
Oh, okay.
Natural sound, because there's such an interesting history around the control of noise there. Whether you're looking at traffic, whether you're looking at planes, the moving of the airport, and that now being turned into a natural space, just couldn't quite reach the same standard of the other shops.
Oh, I feel like we've brought something out for you. I'm sorry. We can put that one back in the bin.
But I think, having been to most of the cities, it definitely was helpful then that I had something in mind already of it wasn't completely fresh upon arriving. But it's just really doing my homework and preparing myself for, okay, if I'm going to go somewhere for a week or less, to say, right, I need to know who I want to see while I'm there. They need to be available. They need to want to spend time with me.
Yeah.
And there's some freedom around, someone mentions, you should go here, meet this person. And giving myself the option to say, okay, good, I've left myself.
Yeah, you can follow the story a bit.
Day to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real fine line, because I'll panic in 1 second. I've planned too much. There's no room for spontaneous things, or we can go the other way. I haven't planned enough.
Why am I here?
What's going to happen? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Wandering the streets looking for nature.
And finding a beaver in a river in the middle of Germany?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen beaver in the UK? Because they're now living wild here in England.
But I hadn't. I think that might be the only time in my life.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you're based in Devon. Well, actually, you're not based in Devon. I know you're from Devon.
Yeah.
Where are you based these days, if you don't mind us all asking?
And now I live in Lisbon in Portugal.
Okay, so you're not going to find a river otter beavers there. Next time you're visiting your parents, perhaps,
exactly.
I'll send you out on some spots. But actually, there are beaver on the Avon here. So I've seen them in Bath, and one of them even travelled up into Bristol. And there's something so incredible about seeing a species, knowing that it was extinct here for about 400 years, and knowing that it's back is exciting enough, but seeing them just inquisitively checking out our cities is so exciting.
Yeah. And so this was in Munich, where I open that chapter by having this experience of, I was told that you could find beavers at this kind of around this area, around this certain time, like dusk, and the kind of amazement first of seeing like what is actually really quite a large animal.
They're quite big, actually, yeah. And when you get a look at their teeth, they're like bright fluorescent orange, and you think, you okay?
You got close to
It is meant to be like that, yeah.
But the other thing is the extent to which life is just carrying on around you. Like, and I don't know if that's an element of like not knowing that these animals are, people are commuting home and maybe they just have no idea that these animals are here, or they know and they don't care because it's such a everyday, like getting excited about a pigeon or a squirrel or something.
I love watching kids excited about pigeons. It's one of the greatest joys in life, watching.
We've all lost that.
That's the tragedy. Like, or you see tourists that have come over to the UK and they've come from somewhere that doesn't have pigeons, and we're all like, bloody pigeons, get out of my way. And they're taking photos of them, and you're just trying to get around them in the commute. And I love watching those kind of snapshots of like, no, everything is amazing. We've got so many weird and wonderful creatures even here and even in our cities, that it does give me a bit of hope when I see moments like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Should we track travel then? Can I ask you I'm trying not to make this sound like a really sticky question.
Go for it.
You talk a lot about climate change, naturally. It's very interwoven with the book. You're a travel writer and you went all around the world, so you can see where I'm going. How do you have that conversation? Like, how do you reconcile is not quite the word I'm looking for, but like, how do you think about your own movement?
There's a few angles on it. First was saying, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it in a responsible way. So what's the minimum amount of traveling that is required to make this happen? Sometimes that was successful, where I can say, okay, I do one trip and I hit multiple cities. It's a logistical nightmare. I can pull it off and say, okay, I didn't have to, that wasn't multiple trips. That was something I managed to compact as much as possible. Obviously, when there's a non-flying option available, taking that. Mm-hmm. But I mean, definitely the aspirations were better than the execution. Like there were definitely trips where it didn't work out in the way that I wanted to. I suppose also justifying to myself, it's about what's the outcome of it, and this is something that any person reading it can decide for themselves whether how it stacks up. But just to think, I feel like I'm doing it with the idea of like I'm spreading positive messages. I'm trying to educate in an entertaining way. I feel like the stories I'm telling are massively enhanced by having physically been to the places. Yeah. So, everyone is entitled to completely disagree with it. But, when I think about other reasons why people are traveling for what to me seems like pretty frivolous reasons. I mean, some of the sports I follow, sometimes I'm listening to an obscure journalist who you're not the main broadcaster of this thing, but you go around the world doing more travel in a year than I did for the whole project. Not to make it all about whataboutism, but there is an element of, I feel like I'm doing this for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And certainly to myself, I was able to say, okay, I felt okay with it in the end.
Well, I hope I didn't put you on the spot too much there. I felt like I had to ask.
No, I spent so much time thinking about it, honestly.
No, I can imagine. I always find it really interesting to see what people's responses are. I still fly, I'm an environmentalist. And just for context, I'm mad at business travel that is unnecessary, as opposed to like people writing an amazing book or going to visit family abroad or going on their like hard-earned one holiday a year. Yeah. The amount of stuff that we sort of ship internationally, all of the things that we think we need and we don't really, that's what I have a problem with. I definitely don't have a problem with you scooting around the world, binning cities, not even making them in the book.
To be fair, I went there by bus.
Great, fine. Wipe the slate, please. I can put you in the bin. It's only a bus city. In some of these cities, though, you tried quite a few, I'm going to say new hobbies. I think you joined people on some of their sort of expos. So you did a bit of bird watching. Yeah. You also did a little bit of... Oh, no, you can't say you're bad at bird watching because it's just watching birds. You might have been bad at IDing birds.
Yeah, that's the thing. I was bird listening, and it's a bit like maybe dealing with a foreign language where
Yeah.
There's two components.
What you recognise.
Can you decipher what is being said, and do you know the translation? And with the bird thing, again, this is in Wellington. Like I couldn't even. It's just noise.
Yeah.
So there's so much noise. She's like, "Can you hear this bird?" It's like, doo, 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 doo.
Nope.
No, I'll believe you that it's out there.
If you say so.
And then if I ever did hear it, what would it be?
Yeah. But I think that that's an interesting conversation in itself, is whether you can name things, does that really impact how much of a well-being benefit you can get from being exposed to things? Like I think there's quite a lot of beauty as well, and it's just going out in nature and being like, God, it's a really nice bird song. Whatever it is, I'm absorbing it, I'm present with it, and it is amazing. You don't necessarily need to be like, there's a robin and there's a blackbird over there having a fight with a wren or something. I don't know birdsong, if you can't tell. But you can still...
And I don't know how much this comes across. I imagine quite a bit, but I'm not an expert in any of these areas. I'm not an ecologist. I'm not particularly knowledgeable about birds or trees. Or I had to do a lot of homework in each case to understand what's the subject matter I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
And of course, they all have the regional variations as well, which I just decided that there was no point me trying to fake that.
Yeah, fair.
Because first off, it'll probably just come across as obvious that I'm faking this kind of knowledge. And also, it's maybe, I like the idea that I'm putting myself in the shoes of the people who are also not super passionate or knowledgeable about these things. And it goes back to the core of the book that I'm not talking about projects which are necessarily saying, oh, this is great if you want to if you want to get involved, if you want to make a difference necessarily, but also for people who are not even aware that these projects are happening. They're just going about their life, normal people, not necessarily into this, and still getting the benefits of, oh, it's nice, there's greenery around, there's birdsong, whatever it might be. And there's so many studies that talk about the impact, physical and psychological health that is improved from having that regular contact, that it's like, it doesn't matter that they don't even know what's happening.
Yeah.
It's part of their daily experience. And so just putting myself in their shoes, it's like, great, just pretend I don't, act like I don't know the details and just let it.
Well, that really comes across. Having met you now, you are exactly how I imagined after cramming this book.
I assume that's a good thing.
It's a very good thing. But I mean, it feels very authentically you, the way that you're writing. And like you said, you're following your curiosity. And I think that's what most of us would probably be doing as well if we were presented with like seeing how a sea wall had been changed in Sydney to create microhabitats for. Yeah. I think a lot of us would go, that's really fascinating. Oh, what clever question can I ask now? And you've done that. You've asked those clever questions and you've made it really accessible. And I think you've brought people on side. I think that's probably something that's really important to come out of your book, is a lot of these projects are going to require public support. Oh, yeah. For greening up our cities. And I think you've done a really good job of showing the many reasons why the public can get behind supporting these innovative projects.
I hope so. I will say, though, I do think that a lot of the time it's really asking like the obvious questions, and the whole book is dependent on the incredible and really hardworking people who are actually doing the project. Like I'm just showing up and going, oh, this is nice. But people who are actually putting these things into practice. I did 100+ interviews in the book, and it's incredible the dedication that has gone into making somebody decades long in some cases. And then I think it's about 1,000 references in there of like academics, researchers, people who are like experimenting and making it possible to add credibility. Yeah. Saying, oh, this is why it matters. And it's just giving them an opportunity to be front and center briefly, to ask those kind of obvious questions of like, what is this thing you've done? And like, is it good? Why is it good? How is it good? What happens if I do this? And just letting them shine for a second, because it's the least they deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some incredible people that you've listed in this book, and some of them even feature in a podcast that you've produced as well, where you've shared some of those. Do you want to use the stage, tell everyone about your podcast?
Yeah, I mean, the book's called Wild Cities. The podcast is called Wild Cities as well, because an adjective like that. But it's
Good branding, right?
Yeah, it's just I wanted to just to find another way to tell these stories. It's a multimedia world, and again, like some of the conversations I had with people, very passionate, well spoken. I'm glad that the book sounds like me, but maybe people don't always want to spend so much time just with me. So it's an opportunity just to get some people on this little podcast I've created and to say, okay, let's talk again about what you've done and just tease it a little bit and introduce what they've been working on, kind of opening the door for something that listeners might say, okay, I'd like to learn more about that.
Yeah.
If they do, there's a book with some information about it.
Just a bit, yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So that's been a fun kind of side project.
Yeah, nice. Well, okay, last one from me. Speaking of podcasts, because it's the most natural segue I've ever done. You've probably noticed that we've got microphones on now. Chris, you kindly let me record this conversation because I have a podcast called For What It's Earth, which makes big green issues bite-sized and asks, like, what can we do either as individuals or businesses or cities to make a bit of a difference to the planet? So I think you can probably see why the moment this conversation was in talks, I was like, oh, please let me record that. This is such a perfect kind of fit for our audience.
And if people don't know this podcast, by the way, it's really good. Like, I
think you're so kind.
very slick, very professional. I would recommend.
I'm blushing. Thank you very much. But one thing we do on the podcast is we always ask one question, which is, what one good thing have you done for the planet this week? And it does not need to be big. Also, it can be the smallest thing. But the idea is more about myself and my co-host Sophie sharing ideas and just keeping that momentum going of these little things and celebrating whatever we can do as individuals so that we don't get too climate anxious. But anyway, you as a guest are not exempt.
Nice.
What one good thing have you done for the planet this week?
There's another delicious segue available here because
God, we're good.
I have spent I've had fun this last week around the launch of the book because I also had made up some like Wild Cities branded like seed bombs. And so I pocketed a couple of boxes of that and I've been going around London, parts of Devon, Bath, now Bristol, and just dropping these around. And it's wildflower seeds packed together with soil. And the idea is that once it gets in the ground, a little bit of water on it, and you're just spreading those native wildflowers. And they have like specific mixes of seeds that are kind of urban meadow friendly.
Brilliant. Thank you, Stanfords, for having us all.
Yeah, thank you. You guys, good listening.